She got a bad little waist, and we tearing down this place.
Hello, welcome everybody. It's Paul from Karis Penco, and today we are talking all about metal in terms of what metals are available on our pens and what that means, and kind of maybe doing a little bit of compare and contrast, but more so to kind of give you an idea of the differences and similarities potentially between all of the metals that we offer. Just so we're all on the same page, not all of our pens are available in every single metal that we offer. So today I'm going to be talking about the Bolt, specifically the Bolt V2, because the Bolt V2 has the largest available list of material options that we currently offer on the website. There's 5 different metals that we use, and all of those are available right now on the website. So we're going to get into pretty much all of that. I'll talk through it. There'll be, hopefully it will clear up some stuff, because one of the reasons that I'm doing this is because a lot of you have asked questions specifically about this. We did have a video that was like this a while ago that talked about, I think, the differences between aluminum, brass, and copper. But this one's going to be more in-depth and cover the additions of bronze and titanium, since we've added those to the Bolt line, and we will continue to add some of those to some of the other pens that we offer. So let's kind of get into it, and we're just gonna switch over the view, and I'm gonna go through things, just explain as I go, and try to give you an idea of everything in it as in layman terms, but also is as explanatory as I possibly can. I am not a metal scientist. I am also not a machinist. Well, I've worked here a long time, and I've answered a lot of questions that dealt with the materials that we use and different machining techniques. I don't have all the answers, so there may be some stuff that I don't cover, if I miss anything, please don't hesitate to just comment below. So here we have the Bolt V2 and the 5 primary materials that we offer. From bottom to top, there is the tumbled raw aluminum, and I'm speaking specifically about raw pens. I will have I'll do like an asterisk addendum at the end where I'll cover a little bit of anodized. But for the purposes for this, we're going to cover just the raw pens. So we have the tumbled raw aluminum Bolt V2 at the bottom. Directly above that is the raw brass Bolt V2. Then we have the copper Bolt. Above that is the bronze Bolt, which we added last year. We added the bronze to the Bolt last year. And then at the top, we have our latest addition, and that is tumbled titanium. So we're going to start with the tumbled aluminum Bolt. We'll just go over aluminum. So if you're not familiar with aluminum in the capacity of pens that are made out of aluminum, welcome to our channel. You must be a brand new person that just stumbled across this page. And I say that because we've been selling aluminum pens since the beginning. That was one of the options that we sold, so it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. But there's a lot of marketing mystique around aluminum. You'll hear other brands that will say aircraft grade aluminum or military grade aluminum, mil spec or marine grade aluminum or stuff like that. So that's all marketing lingo. That's all marketing speak. And while we have used some of that in the past, we often use that very much more tongue-in-cheek than we do in a traditional sense of the word. We use 6061 T6 aluminum for our aluminum pens. That is the standard that we use. We do get some of it milled specifically for us. We purchase from a couple different vendors and specifically have it made to our specifications, ground to our specifications, and in specific sizes. Predominantly aluminum, and this style of aluminum, 66T6, is used in aircraft, and marine and electrical connectors and brake pistons and hydraulics and valves and appliances, bike frames frequently, camera lenses and camera lens mounts, external stuff like that. Those are going to be your primary uses for this grade of aluminum. It is one of the best aluminums in terms of anodizing. It provides the best surface for anodized treatments, especially bright dip anodize, which is what we use to make the really shiny bright dip, the really shiny colors. So that's one of the reasons that we use 60, 61 instead of 70, 75 or some of the other aluminum that you'll see on the market. Our clips are also stamped out of 60, 61. We did that specifically so that when we did anodize them, they would have as good of a chance to color match the pens when we wanted to do a single color pen. And we haven't, for pen applications, we have not used any of the other aluminums that are out there, 7075 or some of the lower grades. A lot of people ask, well, why don't you use 7075? 7075 is predominantly used in firearms and some other military grade, and that's the term, but it's military specific uses. It's not as, it doesn't do as well with bright dip anodize. It's more costly, and our prices would definitely have to go up significantly if we used 7075. And it's just not that big of a difference between the two. Now, one thing I want to talk about specifically, I'm not going to go into specifics of like hardnesses or tensile strengths to compare them. It's very difficult to compare in layman's terms when talking about like hardnesses, because there's multiple different hardness scales: Brunel, Vickers, Rockwell, A, B, C, D, E, F. And then there's different measurements in terms of tensile strength, whether it's metric or English. And you really have to kind of get into the weeds to understand those, to understand what they're talking about and how tensile strength changes at different temperatures for different materials. If you're curious to that at all, I suggest that you use a resource called matweb.com, matweb.com, matweb. They specifically have material property data, and you can look up the specifics of a type of, all different types of materials, and they'll give you a list of the specifics, all those different things, the tensile strengths at different temperatures for a specific type and size and diameter of different things. So I know that a lot of people are curious about the hardnesses and stuff like that, and you really just can't compare them because like titanium is on a different hardness scale than aluminum is if you use the Rockwell, which I believe is a drop test. And in terms of our pens, that would be the one that would, in terms of our products, that would be the primary one we would want to use, as opposed to tensile strength, which is, the shearing of the material when it's pulled at different weights and different temperatures, and under pressure. So there is a lot of that. That's kind of getting into the woods on things, and that's as much as I'm going to get into the woods. Just so what I will say is in terms of the aluminum, while it is not, while on a a hardness scale of a drop test, it is one of the softer materials on this of these 5. It does protect a lot from drops due to weight and just and what you're dropping it. There's a lot of difference in how it drops, and the angle of the drop and the weight of the product being dropped, and science goes into all that stuff, and how things that are dropped gets damaged. So it's definitely not the hardest. It is easy to scratch in terms of if you're carrying it in your pocket and stuff like that. But it is a very robust material, as well as you can tell by the uses that it normally is used for. Okay, so let's move right along. So we use free cutting C360 or C36000, depending on the manufacturer you get it from. It's either 360 or 36,000, C360 or C36000, free cutting brass. You'll normally see this used in screw machine parts and gears, stuff like that. It's very corrosion. It's relatively corrosion resistant, especially when it's not mixed with other materials. Machines, the reason it's free cutting, the term free cutting on there, is that it has really good machinability. So it's easier to machine. It chips a lot easier than some other different types of copper alloys. And so there's that. It's used some in pipe fittings and stuff like that too. So that's kind of where we are with that in terms of what it's normally used for. It's considerably heavier than aluminum. I'm trying to think in terms of that pin specifically. You're looking at like 5 times the. Oh, I should have had this up already, so you have to give me just a little second here. The weight of the aluminum is about an ounce, not 5 times. It's 2.5 times, and the brass is 2.5 ounces, so another ounce and a half on top of that 1 ounce. So it's considerable difference in weight. Especially if you're used to using an aluminum or a plastic pen and you're switching to a metal pen. That is a big thing that you do need to take into consideration, just so you're aware. So there's that big difference. It is relatively hard in terms of deforming, breaking, drops. Because it's untreated, it will patina over time, whereas aluminum doesn't really patina, brass will. It can scratch a lot easier, especially fine scratches from particulates, dirt, dust. Wiping it on a cloth that is rough can actually scratch it. You can get lots of fine scratches on brass just because it machines very, very detailed. And then the finish that we do is a high polish finish. So it really kind of eliminates a lot of those any scratches that could be there. We do sand it beforehand and then basically polish it in a solution to get it that nice and shininess, but you can actually scratch it relatively easily. It is a copper alloy, so there is that possibility of it giving you the penny smell, what people call the penny smell when you carry it or write with it for a long period of time. So just so you know, that is a possibility with brass. But other than that, it's definitely a robust. If you like a heavier pen, but you want something that's going to be pretty durable, definitely the brass is definitely an option for somebody who wants a really heavy pen. Moving along to copper, we use C14500 or 145, C145 tellurium bearing copper. So basically, this is a copper alloy that is like 99.9% copper and has a teeny tiny bit of material called tellurium that's added to it. It's alloyed to it and basically what that does is it makes it so that it can be machined. It hardens it just a little bit so that it actually can be machined. Properties that this is used for, it's very conductive with electricity. It's very corrosion resistant. It has that nice copper color. It's used with electrical connectors, motor switches, parts like that, plumbing fittings again, copper soldering connectors. Used to be used, I think, for transistor bases and stuff like that. And off the top of my head, I think that's about all the major ones that you'll see connected to this specifically, this type of copper. It's machinable. It actually, I think this version, I think tellurium copper is also forgeable. Oh boy. You can use it for a lot of other things besides machining, because I think you can also do swaging, stamping, and some of the copper spinning with with tellurium copper as well. But again, once again, I'm not a machinist and I'm not a metal scientist, but off the top of my head in the past, those are some of the things that I remember being asked and answering when people would ask me specifics about tellurium copper. So backtracking just a smidge to the brass, there is lead, a little bit of lead in C36, C360 brass. There just is. It's added to that type of brass. It's a very minimal amount of lead. There is no lead in tellurium copper. It is lead free. It's literally just 99.9% copper, and it's actually 99.9, like 9 or 9.8% copper, and just a teeny tiny bit of tellurium, like I said, just legitimately just added to make it more machinable, because copper has a tendency not to chip and to gum up and kind of be soft when you work it with other metal tools. This is going to be our heaviest pen. The copper is heavier than brass and bronze, coming in at like, almost 3 ounces. I think the copper bolt is like 2.7 or 2.8. So it's not drastically heavier than the brass or the bronze, but it is heavier, and noticeably heavier. Like if you hold them both side by side, you'll be like, yeah, you know what? I can actually feel the difference between those, especially when I'm writing. Like I definitely can, and I know a lot of other people have commented that they can too. While they feel extremely heavier than, considerably heavier than the aluminum, and you'll notice a difference immediately upon picking up brass, copper, or bronze after you've written with aluminum. When you kind of hold them, you can still tell the difference between them when holding them. Once again, so copper is while it's hard, not as hard as aluminum. It does. It's soft. It scratches easily. Again, same reasons, same types of scratches as the brass does. You're gonna get those really micro scratches with even just like if you got some sand in your pocket or you carry it in your pocket, if the sand's kind of embedded in the fabric, you're gonna get scratches on it from stuff like that. It just is very with the type of surface treatment that we get and how clean the machining is on it, it does show off, and it's not treated. Once again, it's just raw. It will show off some of the scratches. Patina is really fast. Copper oxidizes very fast, especially from use and in more humid climates. And it definitely reacts so the enzymes or copper reacts to enzymes in people's hands and in your skin, and the oils that are in your skin, natural occurring oils, and some people their skin reacts to it more than others because of the pH balance difference in our skin. And so you can actually have, like, if you're depending on your pH of your natural pH of your skin, or any additives that you potentially throw that off, lotions or soaps, can change how copper reacts when you write with it. So some people might not react at all. They might be able to write all day long without getting hardly any of the penny smell, and nothing really, like no change in the surface of where they've gripped the pen, while other people with a different pH could have dramatic results where just after like a minute or two of writing with it, you can actually see a black residue on the surface of the pen, and the penny smell is very strong and pungent. And there's actually such a thing as copper allergies, where in a very short period of time, it's not a dangerous allergy most of the time. It's actually where your skin just reacts with it almost immediately on touch, and it creates a very black coating basically on the material and on your fingers. It's basically like sped up, where everything's sped up, where it's just gets really black. We've had a few customers that actually had that happen to them, and that's where we narrowed it down to. We figured out, and they later told us about that reaction that they had. It is very prone to damage being dropped. That's the biggest one that I always tell people. If you're not really careful with your pens, and you drop them a lot, or you're you write frequently out and about and have a tendency to just kind of throw stuff around, you probably are going to get dings and dents on the surface. You're likely going to dent the tip, because they almost always land tip down, which would require them to be reamed in order to be used again. And in some cases, I've seen them dropped from a great enough height where the bolt knob has been bent enough so that it doesn't press down any further, just on the copper versions, not on the others. So there is that to take into account. It's, but it's a color that is dramatically different than all the others. Can't really replicate it very well, even with paints and coatings, unless you're copper coating something, in which case you're still going to get that that type of reaction with it. But a lot of people love that look and love that color. All right, so next we have the bronze that we've added, which is C630 nickel aluminum bronze. So it's bronze with aluminum and nickel added, along with the normal iron that's in bronze. And basically that type of bronze is much easier to machine. You'll see these similar applications for this as the brass, nuts and bolts and fixtures. There's marine uses for this, some aircraft parts, and moving parts for valves and pumps are sometimes made out of this type of bronze. So yeah, that kind of applications for this specifically. It is a very robust material, much more robust than the brass, which is considerably harder than aluminum, than the 6061 aluminum. This one is even more harder. In fact, I think, and it does, depending on where it gets dropped, it does some weird things. It can deform in terms of similar to the brass and aluminum and copper, where it kind of like smushes parts over, where the tip gets a little bit deformed and you have to machine it or have to ream it out with like a drill or something. But I've also had situations where we ended up dropping one and the piece like chipped out of it. And I think it's just what it dropped on. We didn't drop it on the concrete that we have in the shop. It actually hit a piece of a big chunk of stainless, and the stainless sheared off like a teeny tiny like chip on the bolt knob. It landed on the bolt knob, chunked it out, almost like cut it out of there. But it's really, it's very durable. Now, it will show micro scratches again because these are so high polished and the surface treatment that we do on them, it's much more prone to showing those scratches from particulates, sand and dirt and metal chips and stuff like that. Like I was wiping it down with a rag that I thought was clean and had some very, very, very fine pieces of metal in the rag, and just put a whole bunch of scratches all over this one specifically. You can't see it because it's not zoomed in, and I polished it since then and tried to get a bunch of those out, but that can occur. Now you'll notice between, a lot of people are like, oh, bronze and brass, and they frequently get them mixed up. The best way I can describe the two of these in terms of what they look like in their raw state, like polished state, brass is going to have a more bright yellow hue, like yellow gold hue, and bronze is going to be whiter when it's polished, like a white gold. It's still bright, but there's a noticeable difference between the two in terms of like, there's not as much yellow in bronze as there is in brass. So there's that. Again, really robust, very strong, definitely an option, and it is particularly heavy as well, right around the same weight as the brass. I think actually it is in fact almost exactly the same. I don't have the number up in front of me, but I believe it is basically within, I think it's actually like 2.6 ounces instead of 2.5, something like that. So nearly the same. And then finally, we have our latest edition, which is titanium 6ALV grade 5. And so this is I think it's the most commonly used titanium alloy for machining, especially pens and stuff like that. You see it a lot in blades and rings and titanium airframes, fasteners. It's also used, it's also the type of titanium that's used in screws for biomedical screws and for fixtures, stuff like that, due to the way that some of the treatments, if I remember correctly, how it interacts in the skin and in the body and the wear that it tends to not go through. So it works really well for being in your body and used for biomedical implants and stuff like that. Once again, extremely durable. Like it's in hardness in terms of the other ones, brass and aluminum, copper, brass, and bronze. They're all, you can find hardnesses for them on the same scales. Whereas titanium is, in many cases, like the Rockwell scale, titanium is on a completely different Rockwell scale than the other three are. It's vastly more durable. The Brunel scale, I think it's like in the 300s, and bronze is in the 90s. And I don't even know what aluminum is. I've never quoted that one, but it's somewhere around, I think bronze is like 92, or no, I don't remember what it is. Once again, I don't want to get into the weeds on that. So just know it is considerably more durable than the other materials. doesn't weigh as much. So you're looking at like an ounce and a half, just under an ounce and a half. I think the pen weighs like 1.4 ounces. So it's like 0.4 ounces heavier than the aluminum. What I would say it is like it's just enough extra weight to add like a noticeable weight difference, and it's comfortable for me specifically in the hand at that added weight. I have not been able to drop one of these and damage it around the shop. That's how hard the material is. I know we've dropped quite a few of them for test purposes, but also just because we're a bunch of clumsy people around here, and several of them have gone skittering across the floor, complete pens, parts of pens. So they're very durable with the tumble, and we've chosen the tumbled look just to kind of give a more uniform look to the titanium, because it can really show machining lines. It takes a lot to get the machining lines off. In fact, the tumbling that we add to it, it's not as noticeable as the amount of tumbling that's on the tumbled aluminum. The tumbled aluminum pens take 30 minutes for us to tumble that finish, to get it that tumbled. We tumble the titanium for a minimum of 6 hours just to get a tumbled look on them. So there is it is a very durable finish, but it's an awesome fill. The one of the biggest differences in my opinion is it has a different feel to it altogether in terms of when you grab it and touch it. It's almost like it has a stickiness without being like gross sticky, just like it sticks to my hand when I grip it. That is added to it, and the tumbled aluminum has that kind of, but the tumbled aluminum also kind of is a little bit too much in terms of that texture. Kind of gets on my nerves. It's just a little bit too tacky, too much tactile, and it also, there's a little bit of a residue that I get with when writing with a raw aluminum pen. I don't get that with a raw titanium pen. There's not really any patina with a raw titanium pen. So they're kind of, we have it in a nutshell in terms of all of the 5 pens. There's going to be a dramatic difference in price point from if you go from the bottom to the top in terms of the difference in pricing of an aluminum pen versus a titanium pen, and a lot of that, and that's multiple different reasons. And quickly to go through that, so I'm not talking for an hour about this. That's mainly threefold. One initially being just the cost of the material. Aluminum is the cheaper material. It's sold by the foot pound, so a pound of material, or a foot of material, and how much that weighs. They're all kind of sold that way. So heavier material, obviously, it's going to cost more because a foot of it is going to weigh more. And increases in pricing over the last 2.5, 3 years, and specific materials have raised the price significantly for aluminum, copper, steel, brass. That's just what we've gone through. You've seen it in lots of different industries, but those specifically. So that's, and then the second reason there is differences in pricing is machining time. Brass and aluminum are pretty easy to machine, relatively quick. So they're cheaper in price to purchase the raw materials. They're also faster for us to machine. They're not as hard on tools as copper and titanium and bronze are. So we don't have to replace tooling as much. And then the last one is basically how much post-machining processing goes into each individual pen. How much time does it take? Like machining time, like the titanium pins take a long time to machine. We have to be very aware of the speed at which we machine them, because titanium can and does catch on fire. We had a fire yesterday. We had some chips catch on fire yesterday. So we have to adjust how fast we can machine each part. We can't machine them nearly as fast as we can machine the aluminum and the brass. And that goes kind of all the way across them, is that time and amount of time that's put into them. And that goes for the post-processing as well. The brass, copper, and bronze all have to be treated basically with kid gloves. We really have to make sure that we're taking time with them. We're not handling them together in a big group, because just rubbing them against one another or allowing them to hit against each other, even at a small, like a short distance, if they touch each like hard from a short distance, they can cause dings in the surface, which then means it's an unusable part because we can't machine too much off. And many times just that tiny of a ding is actually pretty dramatic difference in the surface of the pen. So we have to take that into account as well. And then with the titanium ones specifically, because it takes so long for them to be finished tumbled, and then we have to basically then match prior to finish tumbling them, we have to put them through like a hand. They're not sanded particularly, but they're smoothed basically on a wheel, to get them more uniform before they're tumbled. So there is a lot of extra work that's put into those. Similarly with the brass, bronze, and copper, those all do have to be hand sanded. So there's all that extra time, people touching them and everything. So all of those factors go into the cost in terms of why an aluminum bolt costs what it does versus the price of a titanium bolt. So there you kind of have it in a nutshell. And it's not a nutshell. I know this was long, but we're covering 5 different materials, and I was trying to be as thorough as possible to give you guys as much information as possible so that you don't have a lot of questions. Hopefully you don't have a lot of questions. If you do have questions, that's great. Go ahead. I would love to have you comment with questions below. If it's not something that I know, I might not get back to you right away. I might have to research it. I might have to talk with Bill. I might have to talk with Josh, one of the machinists. However, I will get back to you and eventually answer your questions. But hopefully you don't have a lot of them. Hopefully this covers most of the questions that you have and gives you an idea of what the differences in each pin kind of give you. I would say that depending on where you're using them and how you're using them, and what your job is and how you potentially will continue to use them, there's differences in carrying each one. As far as for an EDC everyday carry, I would suggest an aluminum version or a titanium version. You want something nicer for a signing pin for your desk. Brass, copper, bronze are great options for those. They're great gifting pins for groomsmen's gifts, or great gifting pins for your poetry writing group. They're easy to engrave, stuff like that. So, and frequently, the brass and the bronze and the copper can be matched with other accents. Somebody loves copper. They have copper on the outside of their house and copper sink and stuff like that. So there's different applications for each one and different reasons why each one kind of is something that a specific person would lean towards. And then finally, I'll just touch quickly on anodized. Anodized is a force oxide treatment where basically there's an oxide layer that's added to the aluminum that is then dyed. And so it's harder, technically, a little bit harder than the aluminum itself, the material underneath. And then it's dyed with different types of dye, depending on the type of anodize that is used, whether it's type 3 or type 2. Type 2 is cosmetic anodize. Type 3 is the anodize that you get with military and firearms predominantly. And they both have different hardnesses and different mill thicknesses of how thick the anodize is on the surface, how thick that oxide layer is. We use type 2 solely on our pens due to the fact that type 3 doesn't work very well with our threads. So threading the bodies together, threading the screws in does not work well with the with our pens. It's fine for the cubes because we don't have to thread anything into those, but type 3 is thin and allows and is fairly slick, allows us to maintain our threading on our bodies so that we can use anodize with that. So it adds a little bit of hardness to it, adds a lot of color to it, doesn't add any weight to the pen itself. That's the difference between anodized aluminum and raw aluminum. Once again, I hope that this has provided you with some context and some ideas and basically some clears up some confusions you may have had and gives you kind of a reference point so you can refer to this. I thank you very much for sitting around through all of this to get all the way through. Hopefully I've been as concise as possible and not spoke out of turn about anything or nothing major anyway. And once again, if you have questions, put them in the comments below. You can always email us or comment on our social media. Thank you for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Once again, I'm Paul from Karis Pen Co. And this has been, our kind of Metal Madness deep dive into the metals that we have on the majority of our pens. Until next time, thanks for watching and listening. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon. Bye.